Imagine standing before a gleaming bronze statue, majestic, lifelike, and motionless. A bull, sculpted with almost divine precision, its nostrils flared, its jaw poised in a silent roar. But this was no offering to the gods. It was a trap, a machine, a sentence, and for the condemned, it was the final moment before an inner hell began to unfold. This is the story of the Brazen Bull. The torture device that didn't just kill you, it slowly cooked you from the inside out. Let's now go back in time to where it began. It always begins with an idea. In ancient Athens, among the clinking of bronze tools and the whispers of philosophers debating the nature of life, a man named Perillos worked not with words, but with metal. He was an artisan, a sculptor, and an inventor. But unlike others who created beauty for temples and civic spaces, Perillos had an ambition that was darker, more theatrical. His genius did not lie in reverence, but in spectacle. The world he lived in was shaped by conquest and cruelty, but even in such a world, punishment often retained an air of ritual. Stonings in the square, crucifixions by the roadside, public floggings. But these were loud, messy, and inelegant. Perillos wanted to elevate punishment to something cleaner, controlled, even artistic. Word of a ruler in the distant colony of Akragas, located on the sun-soaked southern coast of Sicily, reached his ears. A man of wealth and authority. His name was Phalaris, the tyrant of Akragas, known for his ambition, his violent rule, and his hunger for control. Not just over cities, but over fear itself. And so, with sketches rolled beneath his arm and bronze samples in hand, Perillos set sail across the Aegean and Mediterranean seas. The journey was long, but he was driven by the dream of immortality. He didn't want to be remembered for temples. He wanted to be remembered for invention. When he arrived at Phalaris's court, he was granted an audience, not because he was well known, but because the tyrant was curious. Perillos unrolled his parchment, revealing the shape of a creature revered across Greece and Sicily, a bull. But this was no mere statue. This bull was hollow. It had a small, tight hatch hidden in its flank, a thick belly of bronze, and deep within there would be room for a man to stand or kneel. Phalaris narrowed his eyes. He listened in silence. Perillos explained how, once the victim was sealed inside, a fire would be lit beneath the beast. The metal would heat, slowly, gradually, with purpose. The person within would scream, not just from heat, but from the terror of confinement. And yet those screams would not sound human. Tubes and valves within the bull's mouth would reshape them into something else. The voice would become the cry of a beast. The statue itself would come to life, bellowing for the crowd to hear. Article punishment, theater, all in one. Phalaris did not smile, but he did nod. Work began immediately. In the bronze workshops of Akragas, under the high Sicilian sun, the bull was cast, piece by piece, panel by panel. It took weeks, perhaps months. The joints had to be seamless, the interior smooth, the mouth shaped just right to channel sound into tone, a delicate harmony of violence and acoustics. But through it all, one detail never changed. The outer surface was beautiful. The bull's shoulders gleamed like polished stone. Its nostrils were flared. Its eyes were carved with gentleness. To a passing observer, it looked more like a temple guardian than a torture device. And that was the point. This was to be the perfect illusion, a blending of horror and holiness. The condemned would enter in shame, the crowd would listen in reverent silence, and the tyrant would deliver not just judgment, but transformation. Then came the day of the first demonstration. Some say it happened in the courtyard of Phalaris's palace. Others say it took place by the cliffs, where the sea winds would carry the sound across the hills. The bronze bull was wheeled out under cloth. A crowd gathered, and there, under the gaze of soldiers and slaves, Perilos himself stood beside it, glowing with pride. Phalaris looked on, still silent, still unmoved. "Show me how it works," he reportedly said. Perilos hesitated. "You mean with someone inside?" Phalaris nodded. "Of course." What happened next is the subject of debate. But according to the earliest versions of the tale, Perilos offered a demonstration of the sound chamber. He may have crawled inside willingly, eager to show that the pipes could carry sound as promised. Or perhaps he was coerced. But once inside, the hatch was closed. And then the fire was lit. Only a small one at first, just enough to warm the bronze and test the acoustics. Those standing nearby heard what sounded like groaning, then crying, then roaring. The bull sang, and Phalaris, watching, turned away. He ordered that Perilos be removed before death could take him, not out of mercy, but to make a point. He wanted the inventor to know what he had created, to taste it, to live with it. The bull would not be his glory, it would be his curse. There was something unsettling about how quiet the bull could be. Even as it sat cold upon its stone platform, it seemed to hum with potential. The surface gleamed, untouched by soot or smoke, still more artwork than instrument. Yet beneath the craftsmanship lived a purpose that unsettled even the most hardened soldier. Not because of what it had done, but because of what it promised. The Brazen Bull was not a device of spontaneity. It didn't whip or lash or tear with immediacy. It was slow, intentional. Its violence unfolded like a ritual. It was not meant to strike terror in a moment, but to let it seep into the skin, breath by breath. Once the fire was lit, the change began. The belly of the bull, hollow as it was, created a kind of oven, a closed chamber of rising heat. The metal would first glow beneath, then warm within. But this wasn't flame meant to devour in seconds. It wasn't a pyre. It was a simmer, a cruel patience. The victim placed inside would feel the heat along the soles of their feet first, then their hands, their chest. Every breath became a burden, every movement more painful than the last. They could not lie flat, nor stand straight. There was barely enough room to shift, no corner to retreat to. The chamber reflected the heat back at them, curling into lungs, pressing against skin, until the agony became the only remaining sense. And then came the sound. What set the Brazen Bull apart from every other method of execution was not just its slowness, nor its aesthetics. It was the transformation of the victim's cries. No longer were screams raw and human. The architecture of the bull, its fluted nostrils, the twisted metal pipes inside its head, and the sealed acoustics of the chamber acted as a musical instrument. As the person inside cried out, their voice traveled through a system of sculpted tubes, reshaped and echoed until the result was haunting, a deep, bellowing moan. Some claimed it sounded like a real bull in distress. Others said it was more like wind through a grave, but there was no denying its effect. Witnesses stood outside, mouths covered, eyes wide, listening to something that blurred the line between beast and man. It wasn't just sound, it was performance. And for the crowd, that was part of the sentence, watching as humanity was stripped from the condemned, one breath at a time. The transformation wasn't accidental. Perilos had designed the vocal tubes with careful curvature. He'd tested the vibration of sound inside different metals. Bronze, he discovered, was not only durable, It resonated. Warmed by fire, it sang more deeply. The bull became an acoustic chamber, an amplifier for pain. But even the sound didn't last forever. At a certain point, the heat grew unbearable. The voice cracked, the lungs burned, moisture evaporated from the body as sweat, then blood vessels ruptured, muscles spasmed, skin blistered, and airways swelled. The once roaring bull grew quiet, not from mercy, but from death. Outside, the crowd would notice the change. The silence wasn't relief, it was finality. And yet, the bull remained serene. From a distance, it could have been mistaken for a tribute to Hera, goddess of women and protector of herds, or a decorative sculpture honoring fertility. It gave nothing away, no smoke, no flame, just a faint warmth to its flanks and a memory echoing through its mouth. This contradiction, the beauty of form, the horror of function, is what cemented the Brazen Bull into legend. Many torture devices throughout history bore marks of violence, bloodstains, broken chains, wood warped from overuse, but the bull remained clean. Because it was bronze, it could be wiped, polished, restored. After every use, it returned to its deceptive perfection. Some say this was deliberate, that Phalaris instructed his servants to polish the bull after each execution so it would never lose its luster. Others say the gleam was part of the intimidation. If the bull looked untarnished, it was impossible to tell how many had died inside, 1 or 100. Eventually, the mere sight of the bull became enough. In time, the sound of the bellowing beast no longer needed to be heard to be believed. Whispers spread beyond Akragas, across Sicily, into Greece, and even into Roman chronicles. The Brazen Bull became not just a device of execution, but a symbol of tyranny. It was a warning, not just to the body but to the mind, not just to the guilty, but to anyone who might imagine speaking out of turn. Phalaris had found a new language of fear. There are rulers who govern with justice, others with fear, and then there are those who seek permanence. Phalaris of Akragas was not content with obedience. He wanted memory, not just in the records of scribes, but in the breath of every man, woman, and child who dared whisper his name. The Brazen Bull was never just about punishment, it was performance, a show, a message designed to outlast flesh. The tyrant understood something essential, that people remember what they see and never forget what they hear. His palace stood on high cliffs overlooking the Sicilian coast, its stone walls kissed by wind and salt. From its courtyard, the Brazen Bull was visible to all, shining in the sun, unmoving and serene. It sat not in a dungeon, but in a public square, framed by columns and walkways. Visitors passed it daily. Markets bustled nearby. Children played within sight of its bronze flanks. But no one touched it, and no one spoke too loudly near it. Phalaris orchestrated his rule like a playwright. He understood the rhythms of suspense, the arc of fear, the silence before the climax. He rarely used the bull. That was the genius. Like thunder without rain, its mere presence created anticipation. Would today be the day? Would someone be chosen? When he did use it, it was spectacle in stillness. There were no chaotic crowds or raised voices. No riots, no gallows humor. The executions were quiet, ordered, like a solemn ceremony. The condemned were brought forward in simple robes. The fire pit was prepared by attendants. Slow-burning olive wood was placed beneath the belly. And then, like clockwork, the ritual began. There was no shouting, no speeches, just the sound of bronze hinges and the closing of the hatch. The citizens of Akragas, standing along the outer paths of the courtyard, would fall silent. They didn't cheer. They didn't cry. They listened. As the fire awakened, so too did the bull. And when the cries transformed into the echoing low of a bellow, the audience heard not a person, but something else. Something not quite real. A voice made monstrous by design. And then they would turn away, slowly, quietly, returning to their homes, their work, their lives. The message was always the same. Speak too freely, and the bull awaits. Phalaris had transformed the idea of punishment into something almost metaphysical. It no longer mattered what the condemned had done. Whether guilty or innocent, known or unknown, their fate was absorbed by the ritual. In time, people stopped asking what crimes had earned the bull. They only cared that it remained full of mystery. This ambiguity gave Phalaris greater control than any sword or army ever could. The fear was self-reinforcing. The philosopher Diodorus, writing centuries later, described Acragas under Phalaris as a city ruled more by imagination than force. The people rarely saw executions, but they knew they happened. They heard the sounds, and sometimes they simply imagined them. In this way, the Brazen Bull was more effective than mass violence. It offered horror without repetition, fear without fatigue. Even visiting dignitaries wrote of it. Travelers from Corinth, Athens, and beyond spoke of the shining bull. They described the polished metal, the eerie quiet around it, and the strange way locals avoided looking at it directly. Some took sketches, others brought back stories. It didn't take long for the legend to grow. In other cities, rulers attempted their own versions, less refined, less artful, more cruel than calculated. But none matched the symbolic power of Phalaris's creation, because his was not simply an execution device. It was a sculpture, it was theatre, it was legacy. For Phalaris, the bull was the centre of his stage, and every citizen was an actor in his drama, aware always of the role they played. The bull whispered without sound that any one of them might become part of the next performance. And it was this possibility, more than any act itself, that ensured obedience. When the fire burned low and the embers fell into quiet, there was no applause, no declaration, no fanfare, only silence. The Brazen Bull, once aglow with heat and echo, cooled under the watchful eye of the Sicilian wind. The bronze darkened slightly as the day faded, the echoes it had carried moments before now gone, as if swallowed by the very metal that gave them voice. The attendants returned. They approached the sculpture without ceremony, bringing long-handled tools, cloths soaked in vinegar, and buckets of water. The work of cleansing was not hurried. It was part of the ritual, polishing, wiping, restoring the bull to its original state, gleaming flawless, unreadable. The bull was not allowed to look used. That too was by design. Each death inside was meant to be forgotten by the object itself, as if it had never happened, as if the agony it witnessed had no claim on its surface. Clean bronze, quiet courtyard, a cycle complete. The people of Acragas resumed their lives. They passed the statue again, just as before. It stood unguarded, uncovered, not hidden behind walls, but placed deliberately in view. A reminder dressed in beauty. But the real power of the Brazen Bull did not come from heat, or even sound. It came from the silence that followed. That moment when the crowd dispersed and nothing was said. No one dared mention the name of the person who had died inside. No stories, no remembrance, as though to name them would be to summon the fire again. This is how fear works, not in noise, but in the quiet after. It lingers in glances, in the way a voice lowers, in the weight of an unanswered question. And so the Brazen Bull remained, still, serene and always waiting. Not just to punish, but to remind. Phalaris believed he had created something eternal, a perfect union of artistry and authority. But history has a way of correcting the ambitions of tyrants. His reign, like so many built on fear, did not last. Around 554 BCE, a coalition of local citizens and rival powers turned against him. The same polished stones that lined his courtyards echoed with rebellion. The silence he had so carefully curated shattered. His enemies stormed the palace, not with whispers, but with force. According to ancient sources, most famously the historian Diodorus Siculus, Phalaris met a cruel and ironic fate. The Brazen Bull, which had stood untouched for so long, was used one final time, but this time it was not a nameless dissenter placed inside. It was Phalaris himself, dragged by his own people, locked within the bronze he once polished. A fire lit beneath him by those who had once feared him into silence. Whether or not this account is entirely true, its symbolism endured. It painted a portrait of justice, poetic, merciless, and symmetrical. The inventor consumed by his creation, the tyrant swallowed by his own spectacle. In the centuries that followed, the Brazen Bull reappeared again and again in writings, myths, and cautionary tales. The Romans, fascinated by cruelty and control, referenced it in literature and law. Even Christian martyrs were said to have suffered inside similar devices under Roman persecution, though such claims were often symbolic. In truth, the original Brazen Bull likely disappeared with Phalaris, either dismantled by his enemies or lost to time. But the idea never vanished. It lived on in stories, in paintings, in whispers of fire and hollow metal, in the fear of leaders who understood that spectacle can rule more thoroughly than swords. And even now, centuries later, we remember it. Not just as a tool of torture, but as a warning. That beauty can mask brutality, that silence can be louder than screams, and that those who build instruments of fear often become their final victims.